I wouldn't say becoming a man is finding a long-term committed partner necessarily. That's part of where a man gets to choose. But I do think that if a man does choose long-term committed partnership, whether it's marriage or some other long-term covenant, that is an initiation. And there is an identity that gets to be shed, parts of that identity that won't serve, that will actually destroy and kill a long-term relationship if they keep showing up.
Yeah. Welcome to the Embodied Relationship Experience. My name is John Wineland. I am your host. And if you are watching on YouTube, please do me a favor and you can subscribe, and you can leave a comment. That really helps get the content out, which is something I'm very keen on. Also, if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, please leave a review. That also helps us to get the content out. So today there's a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I have a dear friend, Jeddy Azuma, here to discuss this. And we're going to jump into the topic of what it means to become a man. And I know this is a very broad topic with so much nuance. Jeddy brings a wealth of experience on leading men in vision quests and in initiation and leading men's groups. And so you're a family man and a father and a man out in the world doing your thing. So before we start, you want to just give us a little, minute or two description of who you are and what you do in the world?
Yeah. First of all, honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. Thank you.
I always start with saying that I'm a father and a husband first.
Yeah.
Because everything I do, all of the bullet points on the resume, it doesn't mean anything if it's not making it home.
Yeah.
And that's really the message that I bring into the work I do with men too, is we can get really good at doing men's work, but if it doesn't make it home to our families and our communities, what's the point?
Right.
So father, husband, and leader of men is really how I see it.
Great.
Founder of Rising Man, and that's the organization we created to initiate men into purpose-driven leadership. And I've really just devoted my life to helping men be the best leaders that they can be so that they can experience fulfillment. Because when a man is really fulfilled and on his mission, as you know, everybody else around him lights up.
Yeah.
That's as simply as I can put it. That's my life's work right now.
Beautiful. Yeah. And I, I've known you for a few years now, and you really do walk the walk. And I have a great amount of respect for what you do in the world. Yeah. And hope to go out into the desert with you at some point myself and do another vision quest. Yeah.
It'll happen.
Yeah. So I wanted to start with this question, really, which is, what it means to become a man. And then especially where you see the modern man struggling to do that, and what sort of, initiations, rituals, rites of passage you see working really well for men in order to make that sort of leap. I kind of think about it this way. I kind of think that there's all these processes, and you and I were talking about this just a minute ago. There's all these processes of rediscovering the parts of your boy that are still kind of running the show in some ways, that are still hijacking, the man, or sort of sidestepping what the man wants to do. And so the way I've seen it in my life is that there's just been many, many times. I mean, having a child was an initiation, raising a child with special needs was an initiation. For me, when I was really young, getting sober was an initiation. I mean, there's all kinds of initiations that move on. And then just recently, I've had my own sort of initiation again, where I've had to go back into my childhood and rediscover and sort of transmute the wounds that were still there. And so what I'm discovering is that there's this process of becoming a man that requires sort of, I don't want to say constant, but consistent examination and ruthless self-reflection. But just on the big question of what it means to become a man, what would you say?
First of all, it's not linear, which I think you'd agree. It's not just a straight line. And it's not a singular moment. There's not a singular moment where a boy snaps his fingers, there's a puff of smoke, and then a man emerges. I think there's singular moments where we mark a very intentional point of transition in these ceremonies that we're going to talk more about. Initiation, right? The word initiate, to begin something, I look at as starting a new chapter, very deliberately, very intentionally. But becoming a man is maybe a forever process, perhaps.
Yeah.
I mean, I know a lot of guys who are at your stage of life who say, I'm still working on it.
Yeah, that's certainly my experience. Yeah.
So I think there's this element of the forever becoming a man that I get to show up for. There's not, I get my graduate degree and becoming a man, and then I'm check the box and I'm done.
Yeah, right.
But some of the signatures of that for me are certainly more responsibility. I can identify a moment in my life where I remember feeling a very distinct, it's all about me.
Yeah.
And now 180 degree, how do I make it about everybody else? And that's been a nonlinear process too.
I want to double click that because that feels really important. It's that sort of process of taking the focus on what you want and what you're interested in and what your priorities are, and then expanding that, not necessarily discarding those, but I guess refining those, and then deciding that other people that you are also of service or meant to be of service to the greater good.
Absolutely. And that distinct moment that happened for me was when my son was born, my first child. I remember it felt like my cells in my body did a backflip, 180.
Right.
And I was like, what is this? You know, and I recognized that there was now a life form on this planet that was really counting on me.
Yeah.
My wife is depending on me for sure.
Yeah.
But she was an adult.
Yeah.
This was completely different.
Yeah. She
And
can feed herself.
Yeah, she can feed herself. This one,
yeah.
if I walk out of the room, he might not be okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there are these distinct moments where there's a larger step forward into that. It's not about me anymore, but I'm still learning that at 37 going on 38. I still have a lot to learn about that. And so that's where the constant becoming a man part is for me.
Right. And what are some of the questions that you would suggest men start to ask themselves, you know, in this exploration of like, how do I be step more fully into manhood? And we can get into it later about the different stages of manhood, right? You know, I mean, there's different things. You're becoming a father, you're becoming a king, you're becoming an elder, you're becoming, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of different stages to it, but what are the questions that you think men should start asking themselves?
One question I ask that gets guys flustered sometimes is, what do you want? It's so simple, but I noticed that especially in modern times, a lot of men ignore that deep question. Not like, what do you want for lunch? Right. What is it that you deeply want that in the absence of that, you're unfulfilled? Because in the absence of fulfillment, I believe there's only resentment. External resentment, internal resentment. So if I'm not deeply connecting to what I want, which again, isn't a snap of the fingers, now I know and now I can make it happen. It's a discovery process. So that's one of the first questions. I can usually tell pretty quickly if a guy knows what he wants. You ask him and it's almost embodied. It just comes right out. And even more importantly, you see it if you follow him around for 24 hours. It's all over his day. He's living what he wants. That's okay, cool. Now we know we're at a different level. Most men I encounter, regardless of how old they are too, they're not really connected fully to what they want. So that's like the first big question.
It's interesting because it would seem that becoming a man then is to align your life with what you truly want, right? To align life with heart's desires, not necessarily distractions and pleasures and, you know, peak experiences and all of those things. But actually like taking the steps to align your life to what you want.
And having missteps along the way, right? Like all of those things you mentioned too, I've experienced all those things myself. That I think of it like walking through the woods on a trail. And those moments where I step off my path because of a vice or a bad relationship, it's like walking into the brush and getting pushed back onto the trail. Some people just get lost in the woods for too long. And that's where I think a lot of people get stuck in substance abuse and pornography. But I think that's all part of the journey and the discovery as well, is figuring out, well, what is not part of that? That's the negative space of the vision. Right? What is not? Sometimes that's what I ask guys too, because if you ask them, what's your vision? That's another question that gets guys really flustered. And they can't paint a picture. I'll say, well, let's start with the negative space. What is it not? What do you know you don't want? Like, I don't want children. That is not what I want in my life. Okay. Well, that's clear. That sections off a portion of possibility. I think all those experiences are informative. I think there's a lack of mentorship and guidance for men to incorporate those learning moments to keep walking the path instead of wandering further into the wilderness. You know?
So, you know, for the guys that are watching that are like, I'm not quite sure. I do feel like I'm wandering in the woods. You know, I mean, we've all been there. We've all had those moments. But what would be the steps that a man could take to start aligning himself more to, the traits of manhood?
Yeah. Well, as you know, we're both big advocates of not just men's work, but having a men's group, a men's circle, whatever we call it, but essentially a container that is so safe that I can unpack my whole suitcase and take a look at everything that I've got. Look at what I'm carrying around. Look at what I don't want to carry around anymore. And again, that's not a fast process. This is the long game that we're talking about here. Now, that can be in a men's circle. That's my preferred direction.
Mine
what I
too.
recommend.
Yeah.
But there's, different therapies, other modalities. But the common thread is having a space that is so safe that I can take off every mask and every disguise I have and expose what's really there. Because until we get to that point, we're really playing a surface level game. We're not getting to the core taproot of who a man is. So again, I think it can be a number of different ways, but that's a safe place to explore that.
Great.
And sincerity is most important.
Yeah, I would agree. And so we'll get back to the question of like, what does it mean to become a man? Your first answer was on responsibility. You also just mentioned like having other men around you who can hold you and challenge you and, kind of keep you accountable. What else is on that list for you?
I think purpose, I've alluded to it so far, but having that unique purpose, Data, right, was one of the first people who put that on the map for me, that a man must make that the most important thing in his life, is the pursuit of that. And at first I didn't understand it personally because I thought it was about family and duty. And I was like, that sounds selfish. But then I came back around to it 6-7 years later and I said, oh, I understand what he's saying. It's not to disregard family. It's to find a way to pursue that unique thing that I'm here for and incorporate my family and all these other things that are important to me into that. And layering my life that way. So I think that becoming a man is actually an art form, like martial arts, right? It's like, how do I bring these components of my life into greater harmony instead of in conflict and competition with each other? A lot of guys struggle there too, where something I'm really passionate about is in conflict and competition with my partner. And maybe it's just I don't have the game to navigate that space with her and tend to her needs. But a lot of times it's also just a mismatch. I'm amazed at how many men have committed to long-term partnership with partners that they're poorly matched with. And so I think that's another thing, is this journey of identifying who am I is priority before I can promise myself to anyone else in a long-term partnership or even at a company. To say, here's who I am and here's what you can expect, that's part of becoming a man. And knowing yourself at that level.
It would seem that this journey from boyhood to manhood is a bit of shedding what your family, pressures were to become a man, what you learned about what becoming a man was from your father, what society tells you. I mean, we have these situations now where becoming a man is wrapped up in power. I'm thinking of Andrew Tate. And not to dismiss everything he says is, shit, but this idea that becoming a man is about gaining power, especially gaining power over women. And, and all of these sort of societal pressures that I think young boys are starting to really come up against. So to me, I'm thinking that becoming a man is really like, who am I really? Beyond my training or patterns or the messages that I received when I was young.
Let's talk about power and authority for a second.
Sure.
I've been talking with men about the signs of the immature and the mature masculine. I think signs of immature masculinity is the desire for power. The mature masculine doesn't desire power. He accepts it, but he doesn't desire it. And I found that the leaders that I trust the most personally are the ones who, they don't crave the power. They don't want the responsibility of being somebody who leads battalions and who is running ceremonies and things like that. They accept the responsibility because that's what they're directed to do. The requirements of a leader are supposed to be informed by the people, not what I want. And so I think that's really important around power and authority as well. I'm big on the word authority. You're saying who decides who I am or the story of me. The root word author is something I look at a lot too. And I think part of becoming a man is reclaiming authority and taking the pen back from anybody that I gave it to or who had it, mom, dad, coaches, and reclaiming that authority for myself to narrate my own story to a degree. And then balancing that with my circle of trust that can hold up the mirror to see where I'm bullshitting myself.
Yeah, exactly. I remember one of the things that I learned from my teacher, growing up in my work, was that he would dismiss anybody who wanted to sort of rise in the ranks of his teaching community if they had a desire to teach. It was almost, and you'd be thinking to yourself, because I remember this, I had a desire to teach. And so I had to, there was something that he wanted me to see about my desire to be in a position of authority, to have the power to lead, right? And I think that is such an interesting sort of approach. And I think that's just something that men may be part of their examination of what it means to drop into a true manhood is, what is my relationship to power? What are my shadows around power? Where am I seeking power and why? Am I becoming an instrument of power that is not based on my past or my desires or my patterns or my defense mechanism, so that we see so many men who accumulate wealth and power and even authority who are doing it as a way to guarantee that they have control so that they don't get hurt, so that they feel safe, right?
Yeah.
And that seems to be a big piece of it as well.
Yeah. One of the indigenous teachings to this land that I learned from the Lakota teachings is the context of a hollow bone. One of the instruments that they use in ceremony is a eagle bone that's from the wing that's been hollowed out and turned into a whistle. And the context of that is that as the wind passes through that hollow bone, it creates the sound that sends the prayers up to the sky, up to the heavens. And the teaching for men, women, everybody in the community is that to be of service is to be a hollow bone. The bone is just an instrument. It has structure, it has form, and as wind passes through it, it creates the sound. But it's not asking to be more than it is. It's the instrument of service. Now, we know these teachings, we can talk about them all day long, but who actually is embodying that? And I think that's why these teachers and masters, they identify that in people. There's a difference, and you can see it. You can see that quality.
Totally.
You can tell when people want it. And that's human. That's not bad.
It's that paradox between, like, the first thing you said is, what do you want? Right. And also being willing to let go of what you want in order to be of service of maybe something greater that you didn't distinguish at the beginning.
And maybe it's where we start to talk about the how, right? I wanted to, I still want to be a leader for my community. But I surrendered a big portion of the how. I've just listened to how I've been called into that. It's been a pretty unexpected twist of the narrative. I used to be a physical therapist, man. I didn't ever expect to be sitting here talking about this stuff with a guy like you.
Right.
And yet that's what my path over the last 12 years has called me deeper into. I never expected to take guys out into the wilderness and conduct ceremonies like that. There was a time where I remember very distinctly when I was trying to find myself and I went on my journeys as a 20-ish-year-old guy. I remember, I want to be a shaman. Right? I'm sure a lot of people had that.
You see that all over the place here, especially in Austin.
It came from a pure place in me at that time. Like, I want to do this so I can help people, but I also wanted to do it at that time to be seen, to be validated. Like, I saw people in that position, had a lot of prestige and respect from the community. So I also wanted that. I didn't know it, but that was driving that underneath. And so this long, slow burn of patience and saying, you know what, I'm not going to go after that because I want it. But what's going to call me into service? And I don't identify as a shaman, just to be clear. That was not the path that called me. In fact, I know that that's a big responsibility, and I don't want that. And so far, I haven't been called into that. I support a lot of people who have that responsibility, and that's an honor to me. But I'm happy for them to follow their path and just do my part.
It would seem that this sort of journey into manhood is about letting go of external validation and really starting to focus on internal validation of what I am, who I am in the world, what I am in the world, what are my gifts in the world, and to let go of, the things that we're sort of, putting our energy into so that we do get the external validation. Would you agree?
I would agree. And the thing about external validation is I do think it's a resource that we're always going to depend on to some degree. I just want to depend on it less. It's like food and water.
Right.
I can never take food and water completely away
Right.
from me. I can depend on it less. And where do I go for external validation is a big question.
I think that's the big question, right? Like, what kind of external validation? Are we looking for likes on Instagram? Or are we looking for, men we trust to really tell us when we're on the right path or off the right path,
Exactly. And how often do I require that? And I noticed that I've gotten a lot of validation over the years for the type of person that I am. And it's always, at times it's polished my ego more than others. And I know that I'm making progress because, first of all, when people say these things, back then I didn't believe it.
Yeah.
I didn't really believe it in my heart. I was like, okay, I'm glad you experienced me that way, but I don't see it yet. I start to believe it more and more. And I don't need to hear it from people as much as I used to. I needed people to believe in me before I believed in myself for a while.
Yeah.
And now it's less. I still do. I still go to my men, and there's moments where I need those guys to say, dude, you're doing a great job.
Right.
Hang in there. You're a great guy. Yeah, you're a knucklehead, but but you're a good dude.
Right.
Hang in there.
Right.
But now I can also source that for myself too. And there's that element of fathering myself. That's another part of becoming a man.
Yeah.
Learning to father me and not having to outsource that as much as I have in the past.
Say more about that. That feels like a really important point.
And there's a lot that goes into it, right? And I think it's different for every person. But when I say fathering, I don't mean that daddy energy. It's just, can I provide for myself what I need to be okay, to keep following my path and show up for my responsibilities? Sometimes it's a word of encouragement. Sometimes it's discipline to get up and go to the gym at 6 a.m. and take care of my body. It could be a number of different things. Creating a career where I can provide for myself and my family. That all falls under that category of fathering. And I think where most men still have a lot of work to do is the internal dialogue. Like the father that externally would sit down with you and give you that beautiful, soul-filling fathering when you need a gentle touch. Like, hey, you're doing okay. I believe in you. And also on the other end of the spectrum, come on. Time to get
put
going.
your big boy pants on.
Exactly. And to be able to give myself that dialogue in a healthy way. Not in these like self-destructive, internal berating ways. But the healthy fathering. When I can do that for myself, then I depend less on that from around me. Then I'm more available for service. And
I love that. And I think that that's something that I see as well, right? Is that, I lead a lot of men and they are this process of reparenting. I hadn't really identified it, but it makes a lot of sense that part of reparenting, part of becoming a man in many ways is about reparenting yourself in the ways you weren't properly fathered, right? And there's so many in my generation, maybe in yours as well, there's so many men that did not have the proper fatherly love, direction, discipline, encouragement, all of those things.
And a lot of guys had it way worse than I did. I have a great father. Taught me a lot of wonderful things. And even having a great father, it's still incomplete. I don't think any one person can get everything they need from either one of their parents. I think going back to the older models, the traditional models in a village, the men of the village were the uncles and fathers to everyone. They're our children, not just my child. It's our children. And the mothers and the aunties treated it the same way. So the way I think of it is I had to go out in the world and meet these different men, encounter different styles of masculinity and manhood, and then take what was useful and make it my own. And that to me is fathering myself. Is taking all of those things and creating what I usually refer to as the father avatar that I want to embody. And then not just in principle, but in practice, take that avatar of a man and be that guy. And then put in the reps over the years. And then that's when that confidence that so many men are looking for, that sense of safety, because even if the unknown comes in, I know I can handle it. That's where that comes from after many, many, many reps of fathering ourselves.
I consider that sort of a benevolent patriarch, the benevolent patriarch. And I've had moments of where I was in deep grief, and I could feel the hand of the father on my back. Right. I could, there's a process I think that a lot of men are missing because they weren't given that and they weren't given it young. So they just have no felt experience of it. Right. And they have to, here they are in their 20s and 30s now thinking like, okay, I have to find my own felt experience of receiving the love of the father.
And it's funny, even just recently, I'm recognizing that a big part of my work and further framing my work is that I'm helping to father men.
Yeah.
And I say that with humility because a lot of people hear that and say, you're trying to be everybody's daddy.
Yeah.
No, that's
I
not
get
what I
that all the
mean.
time.
No, it's just another way of describing more clearly what mentorship and guidance looks like.
Yeah.
And any one of us can father each other. We say that at our events.
Yeah.
I can be fathered by any other man in any moment.
Yeah.
We all sit on the ground together. I just happen to be in a position to give something that you may not have for yourself right now.
Yeah.
And a lot of guys who don't, like we were saying before, didn't have a father at all, or they had an alcoholic father. Like they got very little useful, healthy masculine from that first primary archetype.
Yeah, that was my experience. Yeah.
And there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
There's a lot to uncondition and then fill in the gaps with that. And, maybe this is a good segue into the rites of passage stuff, because shedding is an important part of becoming a man too, and releasing. And one of the things we miss in our current society framework is that we don't have a lot of clear ways to release an identity. And we over-identify with certain things and certain qualities that they can stick with guys. I've taken out 70-year-old men to fast who are shedding things from their childhood still.
Yeah.
So,
okay, so if I am a man, in my, let's say, early 30s, and I'm aware, like, okay, I didn't get the fathering that I needed, and I don't really have a clear path on what it means to become a man. What are some of the steps that you would give to that guy?
It really depends on where a man is at. But if a man is sincerely ready to release who he's been and to do that deep inventory of what has impacted the man that I am currently and what's no longer working. Like I said before, unpacking the suitcase and going through it and discarding and jettisoning the things that aren't going to serve me for what I want to be. That's when I start talking to guys about rites of passage, because a rite of passage ceremony is a death and a rebirth. I often use the metaphor of a chapter book where you're putting the finishing touches on this chapter of your life. You're doing a lot of that beautiful completion work and having conversations and really laying to rest who you've been.
Right.
It's a courageous thing.
Right.
I make sure guys don't take it lightly. This isn't just another thing you're doing. You're actually deciding to let this identity die. It's very vulnerable. And then you step into this window, this portal of the unknown where you don't actually have a form for 4 days, right? You don't actually have, you're formless and you're being informed by what your experience is and then emerging on the other side to fresh pages in a new chapter. That's a really deliberate and intentional journey to take. So I usually talk to guys and do my process of discovery to say, is this something you're really ready for? Is there actually a threshold that you're marking for yourself? It can be boyhood to manhood. It can be going into fatherhood. When I went out and did my first fast, it was 3 weeks before I got married. It was 4 months before we got pregnant with our first child. Wow. So I was marking the end of my knighthood, adolescence. It's all about me days and going out to learn, what do I need to be a husband, a provider, a father, et cetera. But it can be any number of things for men. It's age and timeline of life is not the most important thing. So that's usually what I would say is like, what are you wanting to step into without having to know the finished product? Because you can't. You can't know what the next chapter holds until you start writing it yourself. But to what degree are you clear on your purpose and your intent to release and to become?
Seems like there's a bit of a letting go of the known and embracing the unknown that is required for this sort of leap of faith that men need. Letting go of all of the strategies, right? Because I think that to me, what I'm seeing is I see men, show up, at least in my work, with so much strategy of, how to deal with women and how to make money and how to live in my purpose. And, and that strategy is obviously built on their childhood experiences, right? And their life experiences to that point, but letting go of strategy and tapping into something deeper. So when you take men, maybe you could describe a little bit about what you do when you take men out into the wilderness and what you see happen to them. Like, what do they get in contact with? What do they get to touch that helps them reorient in all the ways that we've been talking about?
Well, for starters, I think one of the things that everybody needs to become a man is to learn how to take a punch in the face. sometimes literally, but I mean more, metaphorically.
Yeah, sure.
Can I get hit in the face with the unknown? And can I wobble and find my feet again? Because that's just going to happen for the rest of our lives. I think another plague of society is that we're trying to insulate ourselves from the unknown, from pain, from discomfort of all types, physical, mental, emotional. I mean, just look at the statistics, right? We don't know how to encounter hardship and difficulty, where we don't know how to resource ourselves in those moments. So a big part of having guys go out into the wilderness 4 days alone, no food, no technology, we're lowering the barrier of safety, not to be reckless, but to let men encounter risk and challenge and adversity a bit more. Becoming a man is all about how well can I handle adversity?
Yeah.
My response
And discomfort, right?
Discomfort,
and discomfort for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of guys, you say, okay, I'm going to take you out in the wilderness. I'm going to sit you down 4 days. You're going to be by yourself and you're not going to have food. A lot of people, that's such a obscure or unusual way to conduct oneself for 4 days.
Right. What's the ROI on that? Right?
Yeah. What is this going to give me? I'm paying for this. Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Because what guys have to realize, especially if they don't have that spiritual orientation to a process like this, is that we are so distracted and so over-nurtured in modern society. It's so convenient. It's so
over-nurtured, right? Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What if we take all that away?
Yeah.
Right? We're going to take away your phone so you can't distract yourself. We're going to take away communication and contact with other people. So you have to be with yourself 4 days. You can't escape that for 4 days. You got to be with yourself. You may have to look at yourself and see the things you don't like. 4 days. That's a long time.
Yeah. It is a long
4 days goes by very quickly when you're here in the modern world and we got things to show up for.
Right.
When you sit down in a circle for 4 days, it takes forever.
Right.
And so that's part of the process too, is encountering these things we don't normally get to encounter. And oftentimes the hard part for guys is not going without food. It's not being in the wilderness. It's having nothing to do. And deeper than that, it's having no distractions.
Yeah.
Because I got to hear that voice inside now and hear what it has to say.
Yeah. So what do you see when a man comes out of this process? I mean, you see them when they go in, and then I'm imagining you're not checking in on them during the 4 days. They're just out there doing their thing.
Yeah.
And then they come back, and what do you notice? What happens to their systems?
Incredible transformation. And it's what I always tell guys, because some guys will ask me, what should I expect to get? And I love that question. You know, it's a very modern way of thinking. Right. What am I going to get?
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
And I tell people that I don't know exactly what you're going to get, but what everybody's come back with. I've taken over 100 guys out myself. Every one of them comes back with greater clarity. Now, in most cases, there's a calmness. You see guys walking back into camp and there's just beaming with a smile across their like scruffy face because they haven't shaven.
Right.
Just because they're so relaxed. A lot of guys come back with inspiration, motivation, confidence, because we just survived 4 days in the wilderness without food. Even just that. Forget about all the other layers of insight and spiritual growth, but just knowing that I can do this is empowering. I can't tell you how many times in the last 11 years since I first fasted, I've thought to myself, man, I've been out in the wilderness for 4 days and 4 nights by myself in the dark with no food. I can send this email, right? I can go and ask this beautiful woman out on a date, right? So there's just a degree of self-trust that comes back. It's different for everybody, but that's the themes.
Yeah. So if we were going to take the concept of that and apply it to the modern man, you know, not all of them can do vision quests, right? Or go out. It seems like what you're asking them to do is you're asking them to put themselves consciously in a period with no distraction, discomfort, deep self-reflection, you know, kind of deep listening, for lack of a better term, right?
Yeah.
I guess they're out there really listening. You know, the way I've always done those kind of practices is to go out and listen, like stop trying to, right, and just listen. And so how would you suggest somebody who can't go out into the wilderness, you know, attend to that?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that too, because I'm also really adamant about this is a way to do this. It doesn't have, this is my way of life. It doesn't have to be everybody's, and that's fine. I also emphasize that in the realm of rites of passage and traditional ceremony around these things, we all come from people all over the world that had different ways of doing something very similar. But there was almost always a consistent thread of time alone in the wilderness and fasting from any combination of food, water, sleep, lots of different things. And there's also many examples of customs or traditions where there was pain that was invited in or introduced,
Right.
which not part of the way we do it.
Sundance, for example.
Sundance, for example. There's ceremonies down in the Amazon where they put the fire ants in mitts, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
we don't do that.
Yeah.
But there's lots of different examples of that. In fact, before I ever went out and fasted, I did a Vipassana, a 10-day silent meditation.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge advocate of that too, because that was another style of learning how to listen to and be with myself and to see in that deep mirror that's somewhere down there caked under a bunch of other gook, what's actually here.
Yeah.
So I would say for anybody who either doesn't resonate with the wilderness and doing it this way or isn't able to find ways to spend an extended amount of time.
Yeah.
It's wonderful to have a daily meditation practice, right?
Yeah.
10, 15 minutes, breath work,
Yeah.
even an hour of breath work. Wonderful.
Yeah.
But what happens when we stretch that timeline and we eliminate distractions?
Yeah.
So anything that creates that unique experience, I think is really valuable.
Yeah, that's something I wrote in my book that, time alone in nature, time with men in nature, like all of these things are meant to get you deeper in touch with who you really are as a man. Right.
And there's one more important component, maybe the most important component is after the fast, right? After the ceremony, after the experience, the peak experience is the incorporation of it. And my teachers, more than others I've experienced, emphasize the importance and value of incorporation. What's the point of doing anything if I don't find a way to incorporate it into my life? That's the hard part. Going out in the wilderness, that's easy.
Yeah.
4 days, 4 nights, no problem.
Right.
How do I take that and sincerely apply that to who I am when I walk footsteps back on this side?
Yeah.
And that's where community is a requirement.
Yeah.
We talk about these auto initiations. That's another interesting phenomenon right now. Like young men, young people know I need to be challenged. So they go out in the wilderness by themselves, or they go travel and backpack. I did stuff like that. And it's like, I need to feel what it feels like to challenge and push up against to see what I'm capable of. Even eagles do it. The most, this is going back to some indigenous teachings. Juvenile eagles are the most revered feathers because they fly higher than any other bird. And the reason they do this is they have this amazing ritual where when they're ready to gain their adult plumage and be able to procreate, they do this ritual where they soar up into the stratosphere where the air is so thin that they lose consciousness.
Wow.
And then they start plummeting to the earth, and then they snap out of it, and they do this over and over and over again till they've learned their limits.
Wow.
And then they never fly that high anymore. And then they start to gain their adult plumage and have children.
Wow.
So we do it. We're compelled to do it as humans, as animals, as creatures. But if we don't do it in community, then there's not that reflection. There's not the accountability of who you came back and claimed to be.
Yeah.
I see you.
Yeah.
I encourage you to be that person. I challenge you to get back on your path when you fall off of it.
Right.
It's a requirement.
Yeah, I would think so. I think there's something about part of becoming a man is to be seen in who you really are, which would include, from my perspective, becoming a man means to show to certain people in your community the shadows that you are, right? The parts of you that you are wanting to shed or integrate. I would say integrate, probably the better word for me, but to be able to show the people in your community and let them love you even in the parts of you you feel are unlovable.
Yes.
Right. Is part of becoming a man. So there's all this, there's oftentimes, I think, this misunderstanding that becoming a man requires so much sort of solo work and so much, what you're talking about, what I've seen is that it's a combination of both, being, what does it mean to be a leader in your community? How do you actually walk in your community? It's something that I've had to, as I've embraced now becoming an elder. It's something I've had to embrace, and in my community, people here and the people I teach, I tend to be one of the oldest, if not the oldest. And so I've really had to embrace walking into my community as that, right? And really allowing myself to be seen as that. And that was a whole other sort of initiation that I went through in the last year or so.
Oh man. And before we started recording, we mentioned these cycles of initiation, right? Again, the modern, call it colonial mindset is that things are linear, right? That it's a step, function of steps.
Yeah.
Whereas indigenous people know that things happen in a circle. And so there's tools like the medicine wheel. Even when you look at a tree, if If you go out into the forest and you stand next to a tree and you look up, you can see this pattern of how the branches grow in like a spiraling staircase up the tree. So there's all this evidence of a circular, cyclical, it's in the seasons, it's in the sun, it's in the moon phases, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And so why would we be any different, right?
Yeah.
Why would it be this linear climbing of the social ladder of gaining, but it's actually coming back around to beginning again and initiating into elderhood, right? I'm beginning again. It's not a flat circle though. It's a spiral, it's a coil, and we spiral up in this direction, but we keep coming around to these familiar seasons. So I'm sure the first steps into elderhood are going to feel a lot like your first steps into adulthood on a cellular level. Like this is, I'm not sure what I'm doing.
Yeah, I don't know if I belong, and I'm not sure, I'm not sure what I'm doing or exactly how to be in this situation. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
And yet you have a whole so much more experience and visibility from up here because you've walked those circles than when you were down here at an earlier one. And communities would initiate their elders too. This is a huge, it's a whole nother conversation, but we've discarded our elders so much.
For sure.
And I always say that you can tell how healthy a community is by the way they treat their youngers and their elders. And you look at two of the populations that were over-medicating, isolating, trying to, with boys, trying to tame the boy, trying to isolate and incubate the elders so they can just shuffle off.
Yeah.
So there's there's so much to it.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I'm curious if we could, expand the conversation into other initiations that you see men go through in life. Like these are very conscious rites of passage that you're talking about, but what other initiations do you see? Fatherhood, you mentioned, but what else?
Fatherhood for sure. We talked a little about fathers. Why don't we talk about relationships?
Yeah.
Right? Let's talk about long-term partnership.
For sure.
Which isn't necessarily for everybody. I don't think it's a guarantee that I wouldn't say becoming a man is finding a long-term committed partner necessarily. That's part of where a man gets to choose. But I do think that if a man does choose long-term committed partnership, whether it's marriage or some other long-term covenant, that is an initiation. And there is an identity that gets to be shed, parts of that identity that won't serve, that will actually destroy and kill a long-term relationship if they keep showing up.
Yeah. So the initiation then is trying to find out who you are in relationship, at least in this example, to the feminine. One of the things that I've often taught the men that I work with is that the feminine is all of it, right? The feminine is the world. The feminine is nature. The feminine is, children. The feminine is the part of yourself, right? So your relationship, what would you say about the difference between how a boy relates to the feminine and how a man relates to the feminine?
I'll shoot off some examples, right? When my wife and I get in an argument, when I show up in that argument as a man, I'll demonstrate humility first. Where did I mess up here? What did I do wrong? Either I'm not listening well enough or I was reactive and defensive. There's a whole laundry list of what I could have done.
Right. You out the boy in a certain way. Yes.
Whereas the boy deflects responsibility, right? He'll project, well, it's your fault, or, what did you do?
You did this too, right? Yeah.
Totally, right? Which I don't know if that ever completely gets eliminated from who I am. That's that self-protective reptilian function of the brain that we cannot lobotomize.
Unfortunately, no.
Unfortunately. Well, fortunately, I don't know. Because it's also important for survival, right?
Of course. And sex and, all the things that, are beautiful in life as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Another man that I've learned a lot from over the years, a guy named Justin Sterling. He actually just recently passed, so rest in peace.
Did he really?
He did, last week. And one of the things I learned from him was this concept of terms, or essentially a man's territory.
Yeah.
What are the things, I do this circular, what exists inside here that I don't compromise under any circumstances? Right? The things that are for me. Now, I don't have to defend that territory violently or aggressively. I can very assertively and calmly impose my boundaries. But as long as I tend to this space of who I am as a man and what fulfills the man that I'm here to be, I can be available for everything else outside of this. I can go shopping with my wife at the mall, even though I could care less about doing that because I took care of this. And I think in relationship and learning to, who do I need to become in order to be here for a long-term partnership? I got to identify what is this and own it.
I'm curious, what is that
for me?
Your
a few things. One of my terms is that I'm a provider, and that's a whole nother conversation. That's more than just money on the table, right? That's a lot of things. I'm a provider for my family. I'm a man of spirit. I'm a man of ceremony. I am a mentor for other men. I'm a man who builds community around himself. I'm a man of integrity.
Okay.
And when I tend to those things, that's my North Star, my constellation of who I am as a man.
Right.
When I'm tending to those things sincerely, I'm whole and I'm complete. I'm not angsty. I'm not aggressive in my relationship. I'm available. Yeah. I'm calm. I'm poised. I'm ready. I'm inviting requests to show up instead of being overwhelmed by them because I'm struggling to figure this out.
Yeah. It's interesting because the way you describe those, it really occurred to me like values, right?
Yeah.
These are my values.
Interchangeable.
Yeah. I've always thought of terms as like, this is what I will tolerate or not tolerate. So for example, one of my terms in relationship, at least, is that we repair. We have a culture of repair, right? Another term in relationship for me is we don't call each other names, right? We treat each other with respect. That's another term would be, I need time alone to be solo, right? I need to have time and space so that I can tend to the things that we've talked about.
Yeah.
Another term for me is that we explore sexually, right? Like, so I think it's interesting, and I think it's a yes and conversation, right?
Sure.
Of like, what are my values that make me whole and complete? And then what are the values in relationship that I need in order to be able to be a hell yes to everything that's not those?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I love that because I think it's actually important that we have interchangeable language for what we're talking about here. Essentially, we're talking about the same things.
Right.
And what you're mentioning as terms in your relationship, I usually call those partnership standards. But if we were speaking Spanish, it'd be a completely different word.
Right. Sure.
The point is we're speaking about the same things. And I think that's also important is knowing what I'm looking for in a partner and what's non-negotiable about that, which is what I heard when you say terms. I think non-negotiable standards. I think there's other standards that are in a category of important but not essential. It's really high up there, but it's not an absolute deal breaker.
I think it's really important going back to men determining what they want, and in relationship to relationships, for example, that I find men are incredibly opaque around those terms. Both parts of them, the values, like, all right, who am I? Regardless of whether I'm in a relationship or not. And then what are the things that are non-negotiable to me in relationship? And I see so many men uncertain about that, right?
Yeah.
So it feels like in this conversation of what it means to become a man, clarity is such an important piece of it, right? To be really clear on, what is your, the way I would describe this is heart's truth. What is your heart's truth around how you want to relate and how you want to have community and how you want to live in the world, those kinds of things, to have real clarity on that. And the Vision Quest is a way to get clarity. I would also, I try to encourage men to take an hour or two. I usually do this pretty consistently where I sit on my back porch and I have a view of trees and nature, and I just kind of sit there for an hour. I love it. It becomes one of the best hours of my day to just sit and listen because my relationship to clarity is so important. My relationship to clarity is so important. Like, let's talk a little bit more about the shedding piece. I think that'd be really cool. Like, so what does it take to shed your old identity and install a new one, or at least take a step into, creating a new one?
Yeah. Courage and honesty. Because exposing those parts of ourselves is really scary. In fact, I think that's what we learn in childhood, is to contain those parts of ourselves, because it's such a volatile time. It's easy to be bullied. It's easy to feel different and less than when our brain can't quite understand what to make of that. So we learn to contain and shelter those things. So I think just having the courage first to say, here it is. This is who I am at that core level, and trust that I'm not going to be judged for it. And then to look honestly at those things like that really is so important, paired with clarity, because you can look at something clearly, you can polish off the magnifying glass and look right at it.
Right.
But if you're not being honest about what you see, it doesn't really serve.
It would seem again that I keep wanting to like identify these places where manhood sort of comes online, and it's to me it seems that you're talking about truth,
Yes.
right? Like it's really, that our relationship to the truth of who we are, not necessarily who we've created as an identity to show the world, is a big piece of stepping into manhood.
Yeah. Which takes a lot. It takes a lot
It
to be able to
does.
do
And,
that.
and that's one of those sort of circular, areas that we're talking about, because what you can identify as truth in your 30s is different than your 20s and in your 40s and in your 50s. I found in your 50s, like there were truths that I discovered about myself that I was like, wow, like I can't even believe that that's
Yeah.
in me.
Yeah.
That level of immaturity or neurosis or insecurity or any of those things are in me. But then when I name it, right, something relaxes in me, something, yeah. So it seems that one of the misconceptions that I think men have about becoming a man is this concept of push, right? That there needs to be force, right? And what I'm seeing happen in myself and in other men is that actually you can feel all of these aspects of your own manhood in relaxation and flow more than in force. Now there's appropriate times to use force and will,
Right.
but for most men, I think force and will that's a muscle that's been overdeveloped.
Yes. Oftentimes I'll talk to guys about becoming more rangy, becoming a full range man, where we can go to these different ends of the spectrum. Because I believe that any quality overexpressed can be harmful.
Yeah.
Right. So being too rigid, like rigidity is part of integrity, like being rigorous can be part of integrity.
Yeah.
We've gotten hit on this. You and I, because we're those kinds of guys, right?
Exactly.
And being too rigorous and inflexible can have a cost at times. It's useful and it can also have a cost.
Yeah.
So I find that a lot of guys who learn to survive in life by being rigid, I think about military guys or athletes who that worked for them.
Yeah.
There's that unlearning of that component of, well, what if you changed your mind about something? Because talk about an untrustworthy man is somebody who will never change their mind.
Yeah.
And there's a woman named Kimberly Ann Johnson, and I'll credit her. This is the first place I heard it. She says, I reserve the right to change my mind. I was like, wow, that's empowering, because then I can be confident and assertive in what I believe today, but I don't have to be attached to that forever.
Right.
I think that's one of those subtle things that some guys get stuck in as they're figuring out what it means to be a man.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. So I think that it would be good for people here to get some ideas from you about, like, how do men identify, right? And I guess we could talk about this in terms of lessons. Like, how do they identify that, oh shit, I am in a time of initiation, or I'm in a time where there's a lesson here that I need to really incorporate in order to develop as a man, grow as a man? How do you, coach men on identifying those and making the most of them?
I think the first ingredient is humility, right? Like having the humility to acknowledge, I got a blind spot, many of them, and I want to look at them. One of the things that I'm really proud of is I've learned to embrace almost obsessively, like, what am I missing?
Right.
What am I missing here?
Yeah.
And that requires a little bit of lightness too. Like, hey, it's not the end of the world to find out that I've got this huge blind spot about how I've been showing up. It can be painful, but I'm not going to get stuck in that pain.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the circle, the men's support, having a really safe place of non-judgment, but trusting that you can be challenged in every direction to find the truth is really important.
Yeah.
And it starts with humility, is presenting myself to that, making myself available and supportable by other people. Yeah. So identifying those things, we talk about looking in the mirror, right? In Rising Man, it's a big thing for us, is looking in the mirror. And
work,
for us, that starts with the mirror of the other men. If I've got 9 men that I've built trust with and I've got rapport, we've got agreements, if they're seeing something that goes directly against what I think about myself, I'm going to trust 9 other people versus me.
Yeah.
And getting into that's where the humility and the curiosity even is really important.
Yeah. The way I'm hearing that is that, part of becoming a man is to have the humility to put yourself in the center of other men you trust and allow them to polish you. Yeah.
And I also have let go of it only needs to be men at all times. I think it's important that I learn to trust the mirror of my partner, right? Because if I invalidate everything that she reflects back to me, she's with me more than any of the guys on my men's team. So I'm ignoring this resource. It requires a little more discretion, right? For example, I don't necessarily take the same value or put the same value on my wife's input on being a man or how I am showing up as a father as I do to other fathers that I know.
Right.
Because there's a context that they just understand a little differently.
Yeah.
But she does have some really valuable insight on how I'm being with my kids.
Yeah.
That applies to who I am as a father.
Yeah.
So if I invalidate and discard that because you're just a woman, then that's not really honoring what she has to offer.
Yeah. It seems that cultivating the relationship with your inner voice, your inner knowing, is a huge piece of ascending, let's say, into manhood, right? Whereas what I see with men who are still, in a lot of puer energy or a lot of, they don't really, I don't sense them to have clarity. There's more confusion about, do I do this or do I do that? And there's less of an inner knowing. And when you're in a relationship with a highly feminine being, this is something David used to talk about a lot, that you should really use her feedback as a way to gauge your level of presence, your level of integrity, your level of grounded depth, right? Like she's like a tuning fork to all of those things. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. But what I also see and what I've experienced is where we take on, it's again, the external validation question. We'll take on stuff and ignore our inner voices to the point where we've now like internalized their childhood wound around the masculine, for example. Yeah. So cultivating this capacity to just know like, no, yeah, you're right. I can see this part, but that other part, that's not me. And that seems like a journey that a lot of men are struggling to really find.
Yeah, it's a great distinction. I think that goes back to my understanding of authority and who I give authority and how much authority I give to them. I often reference Bruce Lee. He has that famous quote about observe everything, take it all in and take only what's useful and then discard the rest and make what you hold on to your own. And I'm like, make it uniquely my own. That's that synthesis. And I think going back to becoming a man, strengthening that filter that I have for everything that comes in. And there's indicators along the way. Yeah. For example, if a man has a mentor in his life, oftentimes we look into somebody because we admire them or we just fully buy into who they are. And I've had men like that in my life. And I've noticed over the years that I give less authority to them, not because I respect them less or I trust them less, but because I've gotten from them what I require and I've made it my own. But there's this balancing out where I'm not just outsourcing authority to them the way that I did. It starts to lower and my inner authority grows. Yeah. Because I've gotten what was useful for them and then our relationship evolves and grows. Yeah. Same with a partner, right? Yeah. Maybe early on, like I really take some things in, but then I learn how to distinguish between what's theirs and what's mine. Right. And I don't think that's a journey that has an end point or a final destination. It's constantly taking inventory and assessing that and developing my inner authority. But I think what most guys are struggling with and what they're looking for is a sense of confidence and trust, self-trust. I can trust this voice. Yeah. He's not going to steer me wrong. He's not going to bullshit me because I've calibrated him against these other resources in my life.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It would seem that, I'm just trying to identify the tools of masculinity or manhood, right? I mean, those two words aren't interchangeable, but they're related. The capacity for presence, for example, right? Like that feels like an important piece of manhood, like to be really present, really dropped into the present moment, to be dropped in and attuned to the environment. That feels like a big and important part of cultivating skills of manhood, let's call it. This capacity to reflect, to really self-reflect, and have the awareness to keep looking at like, okay, here's the stimulus from the outer world. Let me get with my voice of inner knowing and reflect and inventory. You use the word inventory. I think that's so important, right? So we've got tools of initiation that include going out into nature and being alone. We've got tools of self-reflection. We've got tools of creating relationship with your own inner knowing, right? Which you could, I guess, call your soul. You could call God, you could call any number of things. Anything else that you feel, any other tools that you feel really important for men to know about?
Well, I would just put a punctuation mark on the community component of all of those things, because I think any of those things you mentioned, there's a version that is purely solo. Yeah. I can go and sit in silent meditation by myself. I can go out into the wilderness alone by myself. I can sit and journal by myself. But until I take this process into some community, some external relationships, I think that's a really important piece to mix with it. Because there's times I need to go and be by myself. Nobody's with me more than I'm with myself.
It's true.
Right.
And I think there's nourishment. There's a really like part of this relationship between vitality and our capacity to actually act as the men we want to be is directly related to how well we nourish ourselves.
Well, I think that's a very almost easy to overlook component of I have to have the physical machine to execute on a big vision too. Yeah. Right. I mean, I don't know, AI stuff, the future, who knows, but
even the nervous system capacity to hold it, to put it into being, all of those things require a strong nervous system.
Nervous system, poise, composure, the ability to have my mind run off, but then I can come back and just be really present with you and be right here. And there's a lot of ways to develop that skill set, I think, you know? So, I mean,
what are some you'd suggest?
Martial arts.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? Like actual physical combat training. Because I mean, there's a lot of people who have a lot of peace and the ability to generate peace within their nervous system. But what about when there's an external force? And we can't just ignore external forces our whole lives. No. So I think I mean, I kind of joked about it before, but getting punched in the face, you know, getting hit,
getting pinned, and
in a healthy way, right? Like not just like scrapping in the bar, but actually doing it in a deliberate way and pushing up against other men. A lot of times I ask men at our events, when was the last time you wrestled a grown man? A lot of guys are like, never. For a lot more and more. I mean, people are doing this stuff. It's growing. I think that's one that gets overlooked. Taking care of my body, hydration.
Right. When guys be drinking water.
When guys are struggling, anybody struggling, I say, let's go back to the basics. Are you drinking enough water? Are you eating good food? Are you getting some rest? Are you taking some time to recharge? Are you doing something that you care about every day? Most people are not doing those things on a daily basis. I know I just got 10 hours of sleep last night. Wow. After my wife was out of town, I was sleeping like 5, 4. So I think just even that, you know, can be overlooked.
Yeah. Self-care. I mean, the stepping into the role of not just manhood, but leadership, right? I mean, you know, part of there's sort of this natural connection between being a leader and being a man, right? It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be a community leader, but you're leading something. Yeah. You're leading yourself, you're leading your family, you're leading a business, you're leading a department, right? And so cultivating these skills of leadership in whatever part of the tribe you exist feels like, you know, a lot of the things that you described, being able to.
And maybe that's the only other piece that's missing is just very clearly emphasizing an arena for practice. Right. So what is your arena for practicing leadership? Right. Like, is it within your men's circle? That's one. Is it in your family? That's another. Or creating something like starting a business, like having these arenas to practice leadership. And I'm really big on safe environments to do that first. Right. I'd rather have guys come in and make all the mistakes on a men's team when we're doing our events and stuff, because the stakes are lower and we have compassion for those things. The world isn't as forgiving. And that's what, you know, we've been doing as people forever, is giving more opportunity to succeed and fail, because that's part of the recipe before we hand over the keys to the kingdom, before we say, okay, now it's life or death. You're going out and hunting and we're either going to make it or not.
Right.
Are you ready?
I taught you how to throw a spear. Now it's time to actually go hunt a buffalo.
Exactly. I also call it bowling with bumpers, right? Like, I'm not going to send a man alone into oncoming traffic blindfolded. Right? That's reckless. But here, you bowl with bumpers and like fall in the gutter a little bit, but hey, just practice. It's okay.
Yeah. Practice is such an important thing, especially with other men.
Yes.
I mean, there's the whole biological component about men just being with other men actually have higher testosterone than men that are alone.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
biologically.
Biologically, it's true, right? So, and men also sitting in silence together or sitting in quiet together create higher levels of dopamine, which then get converted into testosterone. So there's a lot of there's a lot of biology that just supports all the things we're talking about.
Yes.
Right. And let's face it, we're biological beings, we're energetic beings, and so being able to have the machine running well is really important. We haven't talked about love.
Oh, how do we miss that?
Yeah, I know, right? And so I think it's such because what we're talking about is integrity and clarity, and right, you know what I mean, and yeah, all these masculine things. But I'm just curious how you would integrate that concept. Like, what does it mean to be a man and have a deep connection to love, or what are some of the ways that we obviously, we get tripped up by love? The men often get tripped up by the feminine in this area and lose themselves. I've certainly had that experience. So how would you talk about love and manhood?
First of all, I think that part of becoming a man is really exploring the depths of love.
Mm-hmm.
When I thought I was becoming a man, love for me was still the butterflies in my stomach for a pretty gal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of it, right? But I think that I've also learned that grief is part of love. I talk about grief as the dark side of the moon of love. It's the part of finding out how much I love someone or something when I can no longer be in relationship with that person or thing, when it's gone. I think love is also finding its passion, its enthusiasm for something that's not just a person. It's appreciation, it's gratitude, it's creativity. Love is so much more broadly defined in my life now, where I am, than it used to be when I was just looking for a partner.
Yeah.
And so I think, and also I think a lot of immature masculinity is investing all of that love energy into one person or one area of life. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of love to go around. Yeah. And so I think expanding the definition of what love is, because for me, I put love in the East. It's that East energy. It's that spring energy. It's that creative, visionary possibilities, that healthy part of the lover. That's just eyes wide open.
Poet, the inner Rumi, the inner Hafiz. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think at least my journey into manhood and deeper into it is understanding that there's more to it than just a person or relationships, but also especially the love that I have for myself. Yeah. Really, I mean, everyone says self-love, but a man really understands what that means. Yeah. I think understands that it's not just, doing these things or meditating. It's actually looking in the mirror and saying, man, that's a good person right there.
Right.
I love that guy.
You do your best.
Yeah.
You do your best. I always think of love in the terms of being a verb, right? And so that, love is this kind of constant choice. And you can you can be walking down the street and filled with love, right? And I think that the way I would define manhood is that you start to develop a really beautiful relationship with the capacity to give it. And the wisdom to know when it's needed and how it's needed, right? And so I think I see a lot of men kind of shy away from that because they're either afraid they're going to get hurt, or they're afraid they're going to do something wrong, or they're afraid they're going to look bad, or whatever the thing is. Yeah. But the capacity to love, like fully, consistently, ferally, unabashedly, as a form of leadership is something that I also see men struggle with. And, it's a big piece of my work.
I'm glad that you said that, because it reminds me that there's also dimensions of love and spectrums of love.
So many.
I think about the love that I received from other men, like that encouragement, that sincerity, a man putting his hand on my heart and tears down both of our faces because he really sees me and he's validating me. But 5 minutes later, the same guy could be punching me in the throat saying, wake up. That's love too. Like that part of love that I think it's fun to talk about because it's something we all feel. And it's the interesting exercise of trying to put words and language to it. But when I think about what it actually feels like, it's an inspiring energy. It's like a seeding energy. It's like sunlight hitting plants, where it illuminates and allows for life to grow versus the contrary. And it can have a lot of forms.
Yeah. I go back to your hollow bone, right? You know what I mean? Like part of what I would define as becoming a man is to become the hollow bone for love. For this sort of flow of love. And you'll see people go too far into that. You see men get too wrapped up in it's more the romantic love, or that kind of stuff. But to be the hollow bone, so that the universal, infinite, consistent flow of love just kind of moves through you, feels like a big piece of modern manhood.
And again, allowing for that expression of love to evolve. I mean, on a relationship level,
Yeah.
my wife is moving into menopause, and I'm fortunate. I have a wonderful partner, very aware and expressive.
Yeah.
But she let me know she's starting to feel like she needs a different type of love from me. And we're in the conversation. Well, what does that look like?
Right.
And then it's clarifying for me. Well, how can I give her that type of love that she's asking for, where it's a lot more curiosity than I've ever given before, a lot more gentleness and a softer touch, which has always been my challenge.
Yeah.
In being a partner, is like, how do I bring the soft touch to my partner?
Yeah.
In that way that just goes against my other masculine qualities.
Yeah. For sure.
So yeah, just that evolution of love too.
Yeah. Who am I really? Right. As the question that we started with, right? Who am I really? I think is sort of the way that I would like to leave this with men, right? Like, okay, who are you really? And what do you need to bring into your life, cultivate as a practice in order to honor that? Because let's face it, in the modern world, like what a man is, what a man does has so much opportunity, has so more than ever, right? So who we are, who am I really? How do I want to share my love in the world as purpose? How do I want to share my consciousness into the world as clarity, as, all of these things. So who am I? It's funny. I was just out in the desert with a bunch of guys, and this was the last exercise we did. Was I just had men staring at each other for long periods of time, asking each other, who are you? And the man's work was to just search, like to really like feel, okay, well, who am I beyond my personality and my paycheck and my status and who am I?
Yeah.
And
beyond your Instagram bio and your resume.
And your family and all the things that we attach to who we are.
Right.
And to me, we hadn't said this, but to me, it seems like the journey to manhood is that discovery of finding who you are, both in terms of your truth as a human, but also your truth as a spiritual being, or as consciousness and love itself. That David talks about two sides. The feminine is love expressed, the masculine is consciousness expressed. And so how do you see men needing to integrate their feminine and masculine sides as part of this journey, right? In men's work, especially, the men's work you grew up in, there's a lot of talk about, the more sort of traditional masculine work, right? But what I'm finding is that men's work today is really about integration as much as, as just learning the sort of basics of being a man and knowing your terms and being clear in your communication and all those kinds of things. So how do you look at integration?
Yeah, I'm one of those guys who looks at the words feminine and masculine as words that have a series of qualities and characteristics that most of us would agree to.
Yeah.
That creates a polarity, right? It's just to kind of take the charge out of feminine being a feminine guy or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think it comes back to just becoming more of that full range type of man, that I can access that soft touch because that's what somebody in front of me needs in that moment. Maybe it's what I need in that moment. And I can also go to the other end of the spectrum and be that healthy, assertive, boundary enforcing type of person. And the more range that I cover, the more capacity I have to serve more people. So the people that I trust the most in leadership, the ones who have earned the most responsibility, are the ones who are so dynamic and going back and forth between those different energies.
Yeah.
So feminine, masculine, right? If we're just talking about the traditional single focused warrior, make stuff happen, logical masculine versus the creative, formless, flowy feminine, being able to access different parts of that. And what really helped me to fully accept that was my dad is a very masculine guy, right? And he's just becoming interested in a lot of these these topics. And so I remember when I asked him early on in my journey of fatherhood, I said, Dad, what does it take to be a father? And this really masculine provider type of guy, he said, I realized that sometimes I needed to be mom and dad because my mom also had cancer and she was really sick for a couple of years. He said, that's when I learned that sometimes you needed me to be mom when she wasn't there. And the way I interpreted that was, he learned he needed to also learn how to soften for me so he could really be of service to me as his son in that moment, not just make it about where he's comfortable in his masculine. And so that for me is what it takes to integrate those things and the practice of it, right? Exploring and trying
Yeah,
those things
I think
out.
it's a big piece of what I teach is like, let's practice being in flow. Let's practice being expressive. Let's practice being, kind of just really filled with tender love. Then let's practice being, absolutely still. Let's practice, accessing fierceness and drive and consciousness, and then let's see what happens when we bring them together
Yeah.
in this sort of unified stream of energy. What does that do?
Yeah.
And so, but what I'm seeing with so many men coming into my work is that they've sort of over cultivated what I would call their feminine. And I'm not saying it's not in a bad way. They're much more comfortable in flow. They're much more comfortable in expression. They're much more comfortable in emotion. They're much more comfortable, but they haven't cultivated these things that we started our conversation with very well.
Yeah.
And so you're finding this whole new generation of men that is very comfortable in flow and very comfortable in, ecstatic dance and all of those things. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Nope.
There's nothing at all.
Not at all.
And what they're finding is that part of who they are as men has not been touched yet, because they haven't really felt what it's like to be totally fucking still as consciousness.
Yeah.
Or to sit in a desert for 4 days and really just face the stillness and the silence, or you know what I mean? So I think I'm hopeful that these things are now kind of, readjusting. The pendulum is kind of coming back, and there's now this real talk about integration and range, as you described it, the capacity to be super tender and the capacity to be super fierce. And,
which I think is our job as leaders, is to model that and demonstrate, hey, you can be a really kind, compassionate, I can open my heart and show you my heart in a moment, but you can also count on me to kick you in the ass too. And to do it from love, not to do it from anger or aggression or frustration. And if that does come online, if I do get frustrated with you, then I'm going to look at you and I'm going to say, hey, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I went too far. That anger, that's mine, not yours.
Yeah.
That's the whole range and for us as leaders is to model that and to be it, to be it and show guys, hey, you can be all of these things. Yeah. I've noticed that people are trusting me way more when they see and experience these different features of me. Yeah. They see me as a father. They get to, I welcome them into my home, and I integrate my family in a lot of the work that I do. And that my kids, my wife, they're around a lot of this stuff. My kids, my son has been around men his whole life and the work. And so they get to experience this full range of who I'm becoming, not who I am, but who I'm becoming. Yeah. And it lets them see, oh, I could do that too. Yeah. Yeah. So
I feel so much more hope for the generation of children coming up now.
Yeah.
With parents like you and Carrie, parent Preston and Alexi, I really see a new generation of parenting that is so much more conscious and so much more whole and so much more aware of, the kind of environment that they're creating these little humans. So, we might have less population on the earth, but I think they're probably going to be better than many of the previous ones.
I'm optimistic too.
Yeah. So what's one question you would leave men watching this with? Like, if you wanted to if they just showed up to this podcast just because it's, they wanted to discover more and you really wanted to give them something to reflect on, what's a question you would offer them?
When you close your eyes, just close your eyes for a moment and see if you can imagine a big canvas in front of you, like floor to ceiling, wall to wall, just a big white canvas. And you imagine that it's telling the story of your life. What do you see when you look at the story of your life on this big canvas? What do you imagine for yourself? Giving yourself full permission to see what's there, what's true. And explore that as much as you need to. That would be the question.
Okay, I would encourage any man who wants to deepen as a man to start with what he has been avoiding. What responsibility have you been avoiding taking on, but is the right one? What feeling have you been avoiding fully feeling and sharing with others in your community because it's in there? What sort of self-reflection have you been avoiding? What exploration have you been avoiding? And to really take your full intentionality and all the energy you have and go into what it is that you have not wanted to look at this point in your life. We've done our job.
I think so.
Yeah, so good to have you, man. Really, really good to have you, and just really love your work. How can people find you?
Instagram. At Rising Man Movement is the organization. At Jeddy Azuma is my personal. risingman.org is where all of our work and opportunities to go out and fast and join.
Yeah, and you take people out 2-3 times a year, right?
More actually. I mean, like there's many opportunities. Yeah,
Okay,
and more are coming in the next couple of years. So
love it.
Yeah, risingman.org. Go check it out.
Yeah. No, I would strongly recommend you get out there. And for those of you who are just wanting to supercharge your journey into manhood, it's a great way to do it.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Thank you, Jeddy. Thank you, man.